Greetings to those who watch below. Before we start today's video, I'd like to say a huge thank you to those who dwell below. Lisa Watts, Aztec Priest, Jess Black Curtain, Wicked Witch, Lefty Kim, Steffi Ray, and Ghost City Shelton. Those who dwell below is an exclusive channel membership that will get you shoutouts on the start of every video just like this. If you'd like to learn more, please click the link in the description box below. So it's that time of month again. Time for some true paranormal tales. This month I'm joined by a fantastic YouTuber known as GothicRose, so please make sure to check out her channel as well. So, on with the stories. Cloaked Apparition and Bathroom Terror by OP211103. Back in the 1980s, my grandparents lived with their 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter, in suburban Bombay in India, and lived in one of those 1-bedroom type apartment buildings with a common bathroom per floor. My grandmother had about 5 neighbours on her 3rd floor. To give some background on the neighbours this concerns, one of the 6 rooms was inhabited by a family of 3. A man, Kumar, his wife Savi, and their son Amir. Kumar worked in a restaurant just beside the building. Savi was a housewife, and Amir was about 20. Since his childhood, Amir had had a habit of stealing money from the restaurant where his father had worked, and had taken up gambling. The company he played with let him win consecutively for the first few times, so he'd start betting big. Eventually he fell in their trap and lost a large sum of money, putting him in considerable debt. When they asked for the money, he put them off for a few days, but soon they threatened to beat him up. Finally, he went to his mother Savi to ask for money. She was cooking dinner, and he went and stood beside her pleading for the money. She denied his request because she knew he had been stealing money from the restaurant, so he threatened to kill himself if she did not give him the money. She thought he was being sarcastic, so she denied him harshly. After hearing this reply, he pulled out his shirt near the flame of the stove to show her he was being serious. Unfortunately for him, his shirt was made of a synthetic fabric that was in trend back then. It quickly caught fire and then stuck to his body. His mother was paralysed by shock, hearing his screams and shouts. He ran outside the apartment, burning toward the hallway. He fell down outside the door of his apartment, and his screams brought all the people outside. His mother was screaming to pull him to the bathroom, but nobody would touch his burning body. Then someone threw a blanket over him to smother the flames. Somehow a few people managed to grab him and rushed him to the bathroom. There were 3 compartments in the bathroom for bathing. They pushed him into the centre one right under the tap. After about 2 minutes, the fire was fully extinguished, but he was badly burned. He was then admitted to the hospital. My grandmother went to see him once. All the skin from his belly through to his throat was burnt off. His jeans had burnt into his skin, so both his legs were badly injured, and some part of his face was burned, and one ear had completely melted. He died after 9 days in the hospital. Soon after, the paranormal experiences began. Once my grandmother was returning home late at night, and she climbed up the stairs and went into her room and closed the door behind her. Then, somebody knocked on the door. She opened it, and a dark figure stood before her. It was cloaked in a blanket, and its face was shrouded. My grandmother was, and still is, a believer in the supernatural, but she's a brave old person, as she was back then. Although she felt that something strange was happening, she asked, "Who's there?" And it replied, "Don't you recognise me? It's Amir. See what has happened." She was taken aback a bit, but she told it to go away and closed the door. After this incident, the 3rd floor bathroom became haunted. Nobody would use it after 6 in the evening, especially the middle stall. People would see the cloaked figure at night, and there would be a smell like burning flesh, and the bathroom doors would open or close on their own, sometimes when somebody walked past. A couple of years after this incident, my grandmother's family moved out of the building to occupy a bigger flat, but for the period of time that they lived there since the haunting began, the spirit never harmed my grandmother or her family. I asked her why the ghost was haunting the building if the person had died at the hospital. My grandmother told me that his soul had endured great pain in that place, and it was still bound to it, or a fragment of it was at least. I didn't quite understand what she meant when she said that. I visited the building a few times, about 35 years after the event, but I didn't see anything different or unusual enough to tag as paranormal. I even ventured into the middle stall of the bathroom, and came out unscathed. I think the entity must have gone away when Samir and Kumar passed, or perhaps the inhabitants of the building had a cleansing done.
It was Halloween night, and I was a small child of 8 years old, preparing to go trick-or-treating with a group of neighborhood children. I was going with my friend Jenny, her friends Haley and Allie, and Jenny's older brother, who would be supervising us. We had just gotten our costumes finished and were grabbing our candy bags. Just as we were about to leave, Jenny's mom announced she had a few rules for us that must be followed. We must be home by 9 p.m. Do not speak to strangers, and wherever we go, do not go down Captain Ellis Lane. Why can't we go down Captain Ellis Lane? I asked her mother, to which the reply was, "That's the rule. Now go have fun." No further explanation. I knew where that road was because I had driven past it in the car with my mother multiple times, but never gone down. It was 3 streets down from mine, and through a series of side streets was connected to my street, as well as to the main road. All I knew was that it was desolate and dark, much more so than the other roads in its vicinity, and had an old abandoned farm a little ways down the road. From the main road, no houses were visible. The road looked completely empty. After a passing thought of, "Oh, that street is a bit dark and poorly lit, that must be it," I put it out of my mind and left with my friends, ready to enjoy the evening. We went down several other streets that had gathered a lot of candy. People loved my costume. I was having a great night. I was ready to head home and mentioned to my friend's brother that we should start heading back. My friends had other plans. On the way home, we stopped right in front of Captain Ellis Lane. I was perfectly content not going down the road, but my friends all said, "What are you waiting for? Are we going or not?" No, we cannot. Did you not hear what Jenny's mom said? We are not supposed to go down this road, I exclaimed. But by that point, it was too late. They had already descended into the darkness, leaving me behind, and I ran ahead to catch up. I looked down the street, and from the view of the main road, it was completely unlit and looked abandoned, in complete contrast to the other streets in this area, which were all well lit and densely populated. I heard the rattling of a flag against a flagpole, but could not tell where the sound was coming from, and the bristling of the wind through the trees. All I could see was one house immediately to my right, an old house that looked like a farmhouse, at what appeared to be the end of the street, and a large fenced-off plot of land to the right far ahead. The left side of the street was covered with trees and brush. It felt like I was walking down a road in the middle of nowhere, and something was lurking in the shadows, waiting to jump out. I did not like it one bit. The road forked. I looked to the right and saw that the street did in fact turn into a more normal-looking and better-lit street with several houses. To the left was a gravel road encircling a large, fenced-off plot of farmland. I could not see the end of the farm, but I could barely make out that in the distance was a small, white shed. All of a sudden, Jenny shouted, "1, 2, 3, I'll race you to the shed. Let's go." And I immediately protested. I insisted that we were trespassing. that the farm likely belonged to one of the houses we had just passed. I did not want to get in trouble, and I will not lie, I was scared. But I also knew I would be left behind in the dark to fend for myself if I did not take off running toward that shed. Just as we prepared to go, with my heart racing and pounding out of my chest, I heard the creaking of a door, which came to a hard thud as it shut. We all froze and stared at one another, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Allie said it must be from the shed. The door was probably not firmly secured and had blown shut in the wind. She said in explanation I was prepared to accept, but did not truly believe. It was so far in the distance I could barely see it, just the vague outline. I was ready to turn and run back, but they began walking ahead of me in the gravel road, now slowly walking and trying to listen for the sound of activity. As we walked, I felt a distinct sensation that someone was following us. There were 5 of us, but whomever was walking furthest back said they could hear footsteps immediately behind them. But when we stopped, they stopped with us, and when we turned around, there was no one there. Jenny's brother called out, "Is someone there?" But no response. As we approached the shed, I heard the rustling of leaves and footsteps in the woods to the right of the gravel road. These were not the sounds of an animal, but they sounded like human footsteps. I was not even thinking of the paranormal right now. I feared we were being followed by a living person, and I was terrified. Even with 5 of us, it would be difficult to fend off an adult attacker. Haley shouted out that she swore she saw a shadow dart in front of the shed and then disappear. I didn't see anything, but I was also too nervous to think. We climbed quietly over the fence and were now in a large plot of farmland. The shed was now only a few hundred feet in front of us. We quietly approached it. I was on high alert for any movement, and I was terrified. I didn't know why I didn't just run back home by myself to Jenny's house when I was on the main road, because however dangerous it would have been, I would have felt much less nervous than here. Haley, the bravest of us all, walked up to one of the shed windows and began to peer inside. It was too dark to see anything. She took out her flashlight and began to look inside. For a few seconds, she looked around and all seemed normal. All of a sudden, she let out a loud, terrified scream, dropped her entire bucket of candy, and ran away from us through the field and back over the fence. She was stuttering as she tried to tell us what she saw. None of us understood what she was trying to say. She was shaking profusely and practically in tears, and begged us to run back to her and walk back home. I could tell she was terrified and on the verge of a panic attack. Lights began to turn on in a few nearby houses, and voices could be heard. Haley's scream must have caught their attention. We quickly picked up our belongings, dashed back down the street as quietly as possible, and headed back to the main road. No one saw us as we fled as fast as we could down the dark street. When we got back to the house, Haley confessed what she saw. She said that she was looking in the shed, and at first she only saw gardening tools and empty crates. But then she saw a child. Not a normal child, but a small boy with a gaping bloody holes where the eyes were supposed to be. A bony, skeleton-like, emaciated frame, and the most disgusting, rotted teeth she had ever seen, smiling in a sinister smile, walking toward the window. We all froze, terrified by the thought. But we all promised that no matter what we did, we would keep it a secret from Jenny's mom that we disobeyed her rule. To this day, I do not know if she really saw the image of a child in the window or if she was playing a prank on us. But recently, I drove down the road during daylight and noticed that the shed was no longer there and had been replaced. I learned that Jenny's mother had almost purchased a home on that street, but had decided against it because she preferred the street they ended up living on. And she too had found the abandoned farm area to be creepy and off-putting, and did not want us to go there because it was poorly lit. If only she knew what Haley actually saw that night.
The Demon by Jess BCR 25. This happened in 2009. I was 19, hanging out couch surfing friends' houses at this age. I'll rename this particular friend Miles. He lived in what my dad used to call the gingerbread house, an adorable little home behind his grandparents. Miles and I went to high school together, but didn't become friends until right after. But once we did, we hung out every single day in his tiny, cute home. For the most part, things were normal and boring, as teenagers are always bored, but there's also not so boring parts. That's where this demon comes in. Miles said this demon told him that his name was Jacob, and even though I was, and still am, into the dead, I didn't really believe him at first. He said he learned its name during a Ouija board session, but I remember that night too. There were so many of us hanging out, and a couple of us thought he was moving the piece. But I do know this demon, which to me was technically just a bad person when he was alive, often messed with us, even during the day. The memories sound so unbelievable, but I was there. It always sounded like this ghost was in the kitchen being heavy-footed or rough, slamming things out of nowhere. There were more grunts than I can remember. But the most disturbing day had so many things happen, all in a short space of time. For starters, a few of us were just hanging on his couch, all looking at Miles's TV screen, which his computer was hooked up to, so we were all just watching YouTube videos. Miles was in his computer chair, and his bass guitar was leaning against his desk. No one was moving. The bass randomly leans forward and does a couple of spins before our eyes and goes back into its leaning position. We all obsessed over that for a minute until right after, his pack of cigarettes, which was on the desk near the bass, levitated, maybe 10 inches or less into the air, and fell back down. We were all shouting, "Did you see that?" I'm sure one kid dramatically runs around in disbelief. Rightly so, because, this wasn't stuff that you ever usually see. Minutes later, a friend of ours suddenly let out a scream and grabbed onto his ankle. He immediately lifted his jean leg, and there were human-looking teeth marks. He was bleeding. We couldn't believe it. I'm pretty sure that same day, another friend was pulled off of Miles's bed by his feet and did the hardest butt plop and just ran out of the house. I witnessed every event that day. It sounds so ridiculous, but I can't forget it. A year after that time, I was somewhat homeless, yet living for only a month on a couch just one town over from Miles. There were maybe 7 of us total in this one trailer, and one girl who lived there got a call from Miles, and she brought it to our attention that he was on his way over with his girlfriend to stay the night. There were already 7 of us there, so we were wondering why, and where they'd sleep. He showed up shortly after. I remember one of the guys in the house opens the door, and there's Miles and his girlfriend coming in to tell us that they were told to get out, not just once, but over and over, and each time got louder and more aggressive. I'm sure half the people there didn't believe him, but after everything we've gone through, I definitely did. He said after all the stuff, this was the first he was told to leave his home. He was shaking and distraught. I couldn't understand how he could ever sleep there to begin with, after everything he went through in that small home.
I would assume that this all happened about 5 years ago. A brief introduction, I think, is necessary. My mother is studying to become a priest for an Anglican church. My father is a firefighter and recently reborn Christian. My younger sister and I were raised as Christians and were taught many things about ghosts and demons. There's not a person in my family who hasn't been affected by supernatural forces. It seems to run through the women in my family. It started with my sister in her bedroom. We stayed in a relatively poor area in a pretty old house, and the neighbors were filthy and had plenty of rats. We would often hear these rats running through the roof all through the day. I noticed, however, that these rats would pick certain areas of the ceiling to frolic and run around. At this time, the rats had invaded the part of the roof covering my sister's bedroom, and at this time she had been having nightmares, where she saw horrible and ugly faces of men and women. She was scared out of her mind, and my mother would go in and pray with her before bed every night. Eventually, the faces left my sister, and the rats found a hovel above my parents' room. Often, you'd walk past their door and hear my mother's guitar strumming, when I knew for a fact there was nobody in there. My mom also began having strange nightmares, where she screamed at the devil and spoke in different languages that sounded too old to learn. My father recorded her once. The last time she saw anything was in the kitchen. She assumed she saw my cat running behind her in the kitchen and thought he bumped into the dining chair. She then realized that the cat was in my room with me at that time, and the shadow/figure she saw was too big. She also remembered rats in the ceiling above the kitchen when this happened, and the chair was still out of place. I was the last to be approached, and unfortunately they approached me more vividly. I clearly remember waking up early one morning to the rats in the roof. The room and sky were still very dark, and I heard talking. Clear as day, a small voice telling me how pathetic I am, and I should kill myself before I waste any more time here. I couldn't find the source of the voice, but as I was preparing to go back to bed, I saw something on my left sitting on the seat by my late grandfather's old writing desk. It was a young woman with no eyes. She looked almost porcelain and too perfect with long blonde hair. I heard the voice flinging insults at me from an obviously brilliant hiding place, when suddenly the woman's head and wrists started bleeding. She opened her mouth and just screamed and screamed and screamed. I froze while staring at her. Please note, I had made no sound at all. My mother came in to see why I was screaming. This event became a nightly occurrence. Eventually, the voice made itself present in the form of what looked like a scaly green monkey. It would constantly remind me of my failures in life. And eventually, I began to believe it. I don't know why I never bothered to tell it to go away. I didn't feel like I was strong enough. Once I screamed at it to leave me alone, and all it did was laugh. It all got too much for me to handle on my own. I saw psychologists, psychiatrists, spoke to my mother, but never approached a priest. No real reason except for the fact I found many hypocritical Christians at church and didn't want to be judged any more than this monkey thing had been judging me. My mother approached a priest for me. A group of people came to bless her house. I remember some judgmental old fart praying over me before we began. Side note, I was interviewed on my appearance and views before anything began. I wear all black. I'm not a Satanist. And yes, I know they're not all about black and killing cats. I'm not a goth. I just enjoy black and I like metal music. And she prayed to God for the gift of color for me. Rude. We went about the house throwing oily water on everything. My mom got involved in the hype and destroyed my father's collection of porcelain skull ornaments. When they got to my room, all they could do was complain about the evil pictures on my wall. I had to remove the word Seether, a band, a poster of the darkness, the band that sang I Believe in a Thing Called Love, and a bunch of bright, colorful fairy pictures. I got angrier and angrier, and the monkey was under my bed laughing at the procedure. I think that one priest may have heard the laughing, or at least felt something awful. Please note, he was the only person who didn't get involved in the religious hysteria going on in the house at the time of the blessing. He looked at his Bible and let it fall open. I believe he read from one of the Psalms. He ticked the monkey off, and he flew to attack the priest. But I was shocked to see he couldn't get past what looked like a wall barrier. I actually laughed at its failure, and it felt great. I will admit that the house blessings seemed to work. I believe the spirits left. Luckily, none are malevolent like these few, belong to the house, and should be left in peace.
Tokoloshe or Poltergeist by Fergie. A couple of years ago I visited my brother Rob in New Zealand and cajoled a few paranormal experiences from him. This took place while he was living in South Africa. Back in late 1987, he was transferred by his work from DR to work at the then Jan Smuts Airport just outside of bustling Johannesburg. After renting for a couple of months, he found a house to buy in the upbeat suburb of Norcombe Park in Kempton Park, which was relatively close to his work. It was an attractive, modern, large house with a pool, all that his wife desired. They moved in with their new baby son, buying gorgeous new furniture to make their home comfortable. All went well for the first 2 years. During this time, a baby girl was added to their family. It was then that Rob's wife began having strange experiences. She would always get up to make him breakfast, as he left early for work on Saturday mornings. Then she would return to the bed. After Rob had left for work, she went back to the bedroom and lay down on the queen-size bed. Seconds later, a body of mass lay down beside her. She could feel this heavy weight on the bed, as if someone was climbing into the bed with her. Naturally, this freaked her out, but she lay dead still, as she didn't know what to do about this unseen bed partner. Later, the weighted body disappeared from the bed. A few months later, she would view the apparition of a baby or toddler in the passageway outside the same bedroom. This happened multiple times, just prior to a miscarriage. Rob also encountered a very strange issue one evening while eating supper. While watching TV, the 3-seater couch he was seated on suddenly moved from underneath him, as if a large dog was trapped under the couch and was struggling to ease its way out. He looked under the couch and found nothing. At various times, all members of the family heard voices calling their names, including visitors. On investigation, this was disproved. Nobody had called that person's name. When their eldest son George was about 10 or 12 years old, things really started heating up. George was outside playing in the backyard. He witnessed their housemaid being literally flung face first with huge force into the brick wall of the house adjacent to her quarters. George was about 4 meters away and had a clear view of the happenings. He was naturally terrified by the sight and all the resulting blood. He ran next door, screaming for help. The maid had to be hospitalized. She looked as if she had been in a traffic accident. Rob mused afterwards, was this a Tokoloshe, which is an African spirit called on to do harm to others, or a poltergeist's work? Later, 2 fully packed taxi loads of African church people arrived to cleanse the property. It seemed their cleansing worked, as there were no similar incidents afterwards for a while. One last thing was reported by Rob's neighbours. The next door neighbours at number 13 would look after the house while Rob and his family went away. One weekend, while the family was away on holiday, curtains were seen being moved aside and someone peeping out. This happened to the neighbour's mother and daughter. They had just been inside the house, locked up, and were leaving the property as they witnessed the curtain in the lounge being pulled aside and held back, as if someone was watching them. The neighbours living next door had also had issues in their house and would hear sounds of people walking down their passageway at night. The passageway had a clear plastic carpet protector laid over the carpet, and the sounds of something being moved down the passage were heard on many occasions by the family. It was later discovered that the new subdivision was built on an old farm. Rob and his family lived in this house for 12 years. Hi guys, thank you so much for listening to today's video, and also thank you so much to GothicRose for doing, as I'm sure you'll agree, an excellent job. If you like the video, make sure to hit the like button. Also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, making sure you hit the notification bell so you'll be informed as soon as the next video goes live. So, until next time, sleep tight.